Infrastructure development in Africa is one of the most important aspects in terms of creating economic growth. The continent's backlog is well documented, having inherited colonial infrastructure that was built to serve the extraction of resources for sale overseas. Now, the South African Forum of Civil Engineering Contractors recently held an elective conference for new leadership. The event explored several approaches to address issues of infrastructure development in the country and promote inclusivity in terms of gender and race, among other things. We're joined in studio now by Webster Mfebe, who is the CEO of SAFCEC, and Victor Kgomoeswana, also, as well as Vice President, the Vice President of SAFCEC, Marina Dumakude. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for joining us this evening on Newsworld. I think, Webster, let's start with you. I mean, it's no secret that by the year 2050, this continent is going to more than double in size. I mean, they're expected 1.3 billion people living on the continent. And obviously, with a huge population like that, not only is a strong economy important and social factors important, but also you would need infrastructure for 1.3 billion people. How are we faring?
Well, I think, first of all, it's important to put things in perspective from the continental point of view. The infrastructure deficit in Africa presents a dichotomous situation in that it offers both challenges and opportunities. The challenge is that Africa needs to spend between 130 and 170 billion US dollars per annum in order to keep up with the infrastructure deficit. Currently, it is spending 45 billion US dollars. Therefore, the challenge, therefore, is where to get the resources to fund that infrastructure. And also, we are doing very bad compared to other developing countries in Africa. But the opportunity in Africa, we're doing bad. I'm telling the global point of view. And therefore, the opportunities are there to prepare for this upsurge in infrastructure. More than half of the performance, economic growth of Africa is attributable to investment in infrastructure, which means the more we invest in infrastructure, the more we can remedy the situation to take care of the growing population. Well, in South Africa, in particular, we have to spend, according to the a report by the G20 Global Infrastructure Hub, South Africa needs to spend 464 billion US dollars, 6 trillion rands in water and in electricity services in order to plug in the gap in the infrastructure investment and also to keep up with the economic and population growth between now and 2040. And we're not doing well as a country. In terms of the GDP target, the fixed investment target is 30% of the GDP. Now we are just over 18% of the GDP. We need to spend more. South Africa has disinvested in infrastructure over the past 10 years. In particular, the 17-18 financial year was the worst one, where the reduction in infrastructure was 113.1 billion rand, which caused the construction industry to go down.
All right, so you mentioned a lot about the financing and the money that's needed for infrastructure. It's obviously a very important factor. Victor, I'd like to bring you in here, excuse me. You did a very interesting opinion piece and a view that I actually would have never thought about, that not many people think about. You spoke about the skill shortage, and you mentioned something how engineers are focused on what is holding the country back versus what lawyers who are focusing on who's holding the country back, and the disparity, between engineers and lawyers.
Yeah. Well, I was saying, Vic, that your economy is losing if your busier professionals are lawyers. There's nothing wrong with lawyers. I just don't think they are part of capital formation. So if you look at South Africa today, we have commissions of inquiries on commissions of inquiry, and all that's happening there is people trying to shift liability. I did not do this. He did that. He took money there and did this. And These processes cost money. I don't know. Zondo Commission is estimated now to have cost $350 million. I mean, 350 million rand already, and they're not going to be done in the next year or two. Much as there's nothing wrong with investigating corruption, I'm saying here are engineers here who are not as busy as the lawyers are. And I gave an example. If a lawyer gets busy for 3 years to shift liability and say, my client did not sue that one instead of that one, versus an engineer being busy for 3 months. When the engineer is done, there's probably going to be a road that's going to be built. The road connecting 2 towns, even if it's 20 kilometers, filling stations go up on the side. Young people set up car washes. Shops go up, accommodation, and all kinds of things. Ambulances are able to move better. Teachers are able to travel better to school. So I'm just saying, let's keep our engineers busy because they are part of the capital formation. At the moment, we are skewed in favor of lawyers and politicians.
Marune, are you busy enough?
I wouldn't say so.
You wouldn't say so?
Yes, I think there's a shortage of work in the construction space. In the past year, we've seen even listed companies, listed construction companies folding. So even emerging contractors are struggling for work. So at this stage, we don't have enough work. And recently at our conference, we had a report by one of the stakeholders indicating that municipalities have returned 40 billion back to Treasury, unspent money. So if all of that money is being sent back, yet we don't have enough construction happening, then it simply means that as construction companies, we are not doing enough work.
We don't have railways, we don't have enough health facilities, we're having an electricity crisis, possible water shortage. Why was 40 million, you said, a billion?
Yes.
Returned?
Billion, yes. Look, I think those reasons were not given to us, but what we do know is that municipalities, a lot of them don't have capacities. So what I would say in my experience as a contractor, for example, we respond to inquiries or tenders from municipalities. So most of the time you get cancellations or the turnaround time for awarding work is long. Sometimes you'll get extensions for validity for more than a year. So by the time you get appointed, you don't even remember what tender this was. The costs have escalated so much. So you are seeing that clients don't have enough internal capacity to issue work and to go through the administration of it.
All right.
So that's where we're struggling.
All right. Okay, Webster. Okay, we've established we have a critical need for more infrastructure on the continent. We are lagging behind in terms when we compare ourselves to other developing nations or industrialized countries. What kind of infrastructure projects should we be focusing on to trigger the economy?
Well, water and sanitation and electricity, and I'm sure electricity is the key driver of economic activity because it powers industry without electricity. But we're better off in South Africa because we have an installed generation capacity of over 45.5 megawatts compared, for an example, to Nigeria, which is 7.4 megawatts, which is South Africa 6 times than that of Nigeria. But we need to focus on those areas: water and sanitation, energy, road construction, general social and economic infrastructure.
And what about public-private, what do you call it? Public-private partnerships. It's a term that I've recently reading up on this, and it does seem to be doable.
It is doable. It has been very successful. That is an avenue which government is not pursuing.
Yes.
And I do not know why, because there's a lot of competition of demands on the fiscus. When private sector comes and take that risk and build the infrastructure over time, it relieves the pressure on the fiscus so that they can focus on other things. And if they do that, that will be better. But there's another initiative which has been wholeheartedly embraced by the president, which is the public-private growth initiative.
Yes.
All the economic sectors in South Africa, including construction, have come together with the blessing of the president to say, what are the actual key projects that can kickstart, ignite the economy, and let's identify inhibitors to those projects. And we're doing very well. For an example, one of them is a project I'm involved in, which is the Limpopo Eco-Industrial Park, a 10.7 billion rand eco-industrial park. There have been inhibitors that are inhibiting the kickstarting of that project through the intervention of the public growth initiative under the presidency. All those issues are being attended to. And we've just signed, for an example, an agreement with Transnet of an intermodal transport facility, which will take 400,000 containers in Mosina next to Braid Bridge. That will then be an impetus for intra-African trade into Africa in terms of logistics.
All right. Another aspect of, while we're on the topic of initiatives, is the China Belt and Road Initiative. I mean, why is China investing billions on the continent? Maybe, Victor?
It's very simple. Yeah. China has over 1 billion people. It needs the resources that Africa has. Africa is underinvesting in its own infrastructure. It's a very easy, I give you the infrastructure.
We take the source.
Even though I use Chinese machinery, yellow equipment, Chinese labor, Chinese engineers, Chinese money, and in return, I'm building infrastructure that allows me to take resources. I get mining rights. It's a real tragedy because we do have engineers in this country. We do have, and to be able to get, because you're using Chinese money instead of public-private partnerships, you end up with those kinds of deals. Remember, Chinese don't play. If they give you that infrastructure investment and you don't pay back, they've shown in Sri Lanka that they can take the asset and take it, and you saw it. President Ramaphosa was in Russia this week. 2 or so Russian bombers or whatever landed at Waterkloof, which means nobody's going to give you money unless they're getting something in return. So my point is this. We need a plan of our own. There's nothing wrong with foreign investment, but that foreign investment must be on our terms, because if we don't do it on our terms, we'll do it on somebody else's terms. And there's no way other people's terms can be to our advantage.
Marina, you're agreeing heavily with Victor there. Would you like to add something to that?
Look, definitely. I think when we partner with other countries, especially when we do it on their terms, it means now we're going to import everything. And now, if it's infrastructure projects, we're losing the opportunity to invest in the value chain of manufacturing materials, of manufacturing equipment, everything else that we're going to need in order for us to be able to build infrastructure.
There you go.
We're going to have to import from them. Now, we're creating jobs in other countries as opposed to creating jobs in South Africa.
And here's the funny thing. Here's the funny thing. By the way, China Construction Bank, a lot of these institutions from China that are building our infrastructure are state-owned enterprises.
Sure. Victor, I want us to hold this thought. I mean, obviously, we have to question this. At what cost does developing our infrastructure come at if we, if the Chinese want to invest heavily and if we don't make you don't sign the contract, you don't, cross all the T's and I's. We're going to take a short break. Newsworld's going to continue, but we're joined in studio by Victor Kgomoeswana, Marina Dumakude, as well as Webster, the Webster Mfebe of the of SAFCEC, and we're unpacking some of the issues surrounding infrastructure on the continent, particularly in South Africa, and we're going to take a short break. Stay tuned.